I remember that night like it was burned into the back of my mind. It was late, sometime after 10, and the rooftop of the Meridian Grand Hotel in Pacific City was alive with music and money. The launch party for Apex Interactive was in full swing. You couldn't go 3 steps without seeing someone holding a glass of champagne or bragging about stock options. The black marble tables scattered across the patio glinted under the string lights overhead, and waiters moved through the crowd like they'd done it 1,000 times, drinks balanced effortlessly, smiling at everyone like they didn't hear a word of the corporate nonsense floating around them. The skyline glowed all around us, neon blues and reds from the waterfront strip painting the clouds like something out of a movie. I stood near the glass railing with a half-empty glass of bourbon in my hand, just watching it all. I was 36 back then. Still sharp, still polished, at least on the outside. My dark hair was cropped short, my charcoal suit tailored enough to look expensive without being loud. That was always my style, understated, but not cheap. 8 years I gave this company. 8 years of 70-hour weeks. Missed birthdays. Vacations that never happened. I'd helped build Apex from a scrappy little startup in a rented office downtown to the billion-dollar giant it was tonight. And yet, standing there, none of that mattered. Across the patio, I saw her. Leah. My wife. She was 31 at the time, still able to stop a room just by walking through it. That night she wore this crimson dress, the kind of thing that clung in all the right places. Her dark blonde hair tumbled down her back in soft waves, effortless, perfect. She laughed at something Marcus Caldwell, Apex's CEO, had leaned in to whisper to her. And her hand was resting on his forearm like it belonged there. Too comfortable. Too familiar. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. Bold, aren't they? A voice muttered beside me. I didn't have to look to know it was Nate Romero, my closest friend and Apex's head of security. 35. Always sharp-eyed. Always watching. He was staring at the same scene I was, his expression dark, jaw tight. I didn't answer him right away. I didn't have to. We both knew exactly what we were seeing. Nate always had this way about him, this intensity that could put people on edge without him even trying. Especially the newer guys. You could see it in the way they moved around him, a little stiff, a little too careful. But me? I knew better. Nate was loyal, not the loud, showy kind, but the kind you earn in the trenches. We'd been through it together, back when Titan Gaming was nothing more than a risky gamble in a rented office above a coffee shop. Why would they care? I said, keeping my voice even, watching the crowd. Elliot still owns the building. His party. His promotion. I gave a small shrug and took another sip of bourbon. Same old song and dance. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her approaching, Dana Mercer, Titan COO. She moved through the room like she didn't need to announce herself, people just stepped aside without thinking. She was in her late 30s, sharp as hell, dressed in a slate gray suit that probably cost more than my first car. Her eyes, cold, steel blue, could cut right through you. Gentlemen, she greeted us with a nod, raising her glass of champagne slightly. Quite the crowd tonight. Nate, never one to hold his tongue, muttered under his breath, Elliot never skimps when it comes to celebrating himself. Dana let the faintest smirk pull at the corner of her mouth. You know how it is, she replied. Every king needs his court. Then she turned to me. You ready for your big moment? Before I could even get a word out, I caught movement from the side, Mason Wu sliding into our little circle. Mason was one of Titan's prized stars, a former esports champion who had transitioned into development like it was the easiest thing in the world. He was 28, always had this laid-back look to him, like nothing ever rattled him, but underneath it all, he was one of the sharpest minds in the business. I'm hearing the announcement drops in 10, Mason said with a grin. Got 50 riding on them, dragging it out another hour. Nate didn't hesitate. You're on. I barely heard them after that. Across the room, I spotted Elliot Crane, Titan's founder, standing near the main stage. He lifted a knife and tapped it against his glass, the sound slicing clean through the steady hum of voices and music. Showtime. The buzz in the room slowly faded as the lights dimmed. I saw her, Lauren, pulling herself away from Marco's side. He didn't seem to mind, though, he was too busy chatting up some investor. Before she made her way across the floor to me, she gave Marco's arm one last squeeze, the kind that said everything without saying a word. I could feel the coldness creep in as she reached me, slipping her arm through mine. Her perfume, which used to comfort me, now felt like it was clawing at my senses. What did I miss? She whispered, that smile of hers all too sweet. I didn't answer immediately. I just nodded toward Marco, who had already moved to the center of the room. He'd climbed onto a small platform, the kind of place where someone like him belonged, the kind of guy who'd turned a small tech startup into a global empire. At 50, Marco had expanded in more ways than one, his waistline, his ego, and his sense of importance. His suit was custom, no doubt, probably worth more than I made in a month. His silver hair was slicked back with precision, and his smile was all polished charm, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. He raised his glass, and the crowd fell quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marco began, his voice booming across the room, "what a year it's been for Vertex Technologies. Record profits, 3 new flagship products, and our global gaming network reaching over 50 million users." A round of applause rippled through the crowd, but I barely heard it. "None of this would be possible without the incredible talent we have gathered here tonight," Marco continued. "The brilliant engineers who code our games, the marketing experts who sell them, and the visionaries who guide us forward." I could feel Lauren's grip tighten around my arm, but I kept my face neutral, not letting a single hint of emotion slip. "Tonight," Marco finished, "we celebrate true innovation, the kind of bold leadership that's taking us into the future." It wasn't just his words that echoed in my ears, it was the weight of it all, the hollow pride behind every syllable. Marco's voice cut through the murmur of the room as he scanned the crowd, his gaze lingering just over my shoulder. "And who better to lead us into the future," he said, his tone full of that practiced drama. Then, he paused, drawing it out. "Betty Monroe, our new head of game development." The room erupted in applause, but I felt like the floor just dropped out from under me. It should have been me, I'd worked my ass off for this. After the last 3 projects I led, each one breaking records for the company, this role was practically promised to me. And yet, there she was, my wife, who'd barely been with the company a month, swooping in and taking it all, leaving me standing in the shadows. Her hand brushed mine for just a second, that familiar gesture, it was all I could feel. Then she moved away, that brilliant smile lighting up her face, like she didn't have a care in the world. As she stepped toward the platform, the crowd seemed to part for her, making way like she was some kind of celebrity. I couldn't even register the muttered curse from Nate beside me. I noticed Dana's eyebrow arch in disbelief, and Mason's sharp eyes studying the whole scene. "Thank you, Marco," Betty's voice rang out as she took her place next to him, all polished poise. "This is such an unexpected honor. I promise to bring a fresh perspective to the team and build on the incredible foundation already in place." Marco's hand found its way to the small of her back, the gesture a little too intimate, a little too personal. "Frank," Marco's voice rang out, sharp and smug, "she's done more for this company in 1 month than you have in 8 years. Everything in the room went silent, all eyes on me. I could feel Nate tense up beside me, no doubt ready to defend me if I needed it. But there was nothing to say. Daphne's eyes were sharp, calculating, never missing a thing. I felt a cold clarity wash over me, a moment of perfect understanding. Suddenly, everything made sense, the late nights Betty had claimed to be working, the way she started showing so much interest in my projects. The texts she'd been so protective of. I'd suspected something was off, but now I knew. This wasn't the outburst people had been waiting for. This was something far more controlled. I smiled, my movements slow and deliberate. I raised my glass, the gesture calm, steady. "To Betty," I said, my voice even. "And to Monday." I saw the flicker of confusion cross Marco's face, just a hint, but unmistakable. Betty's smile faltered for a moment before she recovered, raising her own glass in acknowledgement. Then, just like that, the party continued, as if nothing had happened. But I wasn't done yet. Turning to Nate, I spoke low and firm. "We need to talk. My office. Now." We made our way to the top floors of the building, the executive offices of Vertex Technologies occupying the whole upper level. Even at this late hour, the city lights of Las Vegas spilled in through the windows, casting golden rectangles across the polished floors. I led Nate into my private office and locked the door behind us. "Tell me you're not just going to take this," Nate said, pacing like a caged animal, his voice tight with frustration. I walked over to my desk, every step slow and measured. My hand pressed against a hidden scanner, and a drawer silently slid open. Reaching inside, I pulled out a flash drive. "I've suspected something was going on for weeks," I said, my tone cold. "Betty's been careless. Too confident. And Marco? He's always been careless. That's why you put together that security audit." Last month, I plugged the drive into my computer. Immediately, screens of data filled the monitor, flashing with information. I had to find a way into the company's servers without triggering any alarms. Jesse leaned over my shoulder, his eyes widening as he processed what he was seeing. "You've been collecting evidence," he said, his voice tight with realization. "Financial records, emails, hotel bookings." He trailed off as the weight of it sank in. "How long have you known?" "Known since tonight. Suspected for a while. It all started when Betty began working late with Victor," I answered, my fingers moving over the mouse as I clicked through folder after folder. 3 weeks, I added, my mind still racing through everything that led up to this moment. "I need your help to push this further." For the next hour, we dove deeper into the systems of Vertex Technologies. Jesse's cybersecurity skills were the only reason we were able to access files that should have been completely off-limits. What we uncovered, it wasn't pretty. There were financial statements showing hundreds of thousands of dollars funneled into shell companies. All of it went toward things like luxury hotels, jewelry, private jets, all for Victor and Betty. Then there were the emails, exchanges going back months before Betty even joined the company. They detailed the planning, her hiring, and her rapid promotion. HR records showed how they had to change the job qualifications just to fit her slim resume. And, perhaps most shocking of all, were the documents outlining Victor's plan to sell off the company to a Chinese conglomerate. No board approval, nothing legitimate. It was a deal that would make him billions, and leave everyone else with worthless stock. The picture that emerged was damning, and there was no turning back now. "This is insane," Jesse muttered as he sifted through the data, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "They've been planning this for months. Betty used you to get herself in the door." I leaned back in my chair, a cold grin spreading across my face. "And now they think they've won. We could expose them," Jesse said, already starting to type commands to prepare the files for delivery. "I could have this in the board's inbox in 5 minutes." I placed a hand on his arm, halting him. "Not yet. I want them both to suffer first." Jesse stopped, his fingers hovering over the keys. "What are you thinking?" "Victor's been embezzling from the company for years," I said, my voice low and controlled. "The board's been turning a blind eye because he delivers results. But this sale, this deal would hit them personally, damage their pockets. That's what's going to turn them against him." I stood up and walked toward the window, looking down at the sparkling city below. It felt like the calm before a storm. As for Betty, I want her to savor her victory before I take it all away. Jesse looked at me with a hint of unease in his eyes. "Frank, you're starting to scare me a little." There was more admiration than fear in his expression, but I could see he was trying to process just how far I was willing to go. "Monday," I said, my voice firm. "Everything changes on Monday." When I got home, the penthouse was eerily quiet. The lights were off, and the place felt emptier than usual. I found Betty in our bedroom, already at the vanity, taking off her jewelry. Her eyes met mine in the mirror as I stood in the doorway. "Some party," she said, her voice light as she unclasped her necklace. "I was looking for you afterward," I replied, my eyes fixed on her as I remained in the doorway. She didn't turn around, just kept working with her jewelry as if nothing was amiss. But I could feel the tension building between us, thick and palpable. "I thought you'd be celebrating with Victor." Betty's hands froze for just a second before she went back to what she was doing. "Don't be like that, Frank. This promotion is good for both of us." I stepped into the room, heading straight for the bar cart in the corner. Pouring myself a drink, I couldn't help but ask, how exactly did the head of PR become qualified to run game development overnight? Betty turned to face me, her expression completely unreadable. "Victor sees potential in me. I've been learning about the development side." "Stop." My voice was calm but firm as I cut her off. "I know, Betty. I know everything." Her face stayed neutral, but I saw her eyes flicker to the side, calculating. "What are you talking about?" I repeated her earlier words, matching her tone. I didn't know this was happening. Betty stood there, smoothing down her dress, trying to keep her composure. "I didn't know Victor was going to announce it tonight. He told me he was still considering candidates." "You knew." My voice cut through her excuses like a knife. The mask of innocence finally dropped, and Betty's face shifted, her lips curling into a smirk. "Victor sees my real value," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Something you never did." I took a slow sip of my drink, my gaze steady. "And what value is that?" "The company's already told me what skills you bring to the table," I continued, feeling the weight of the words. "But I'm still confused." Betty didn't even flinch. "I have vision," she shot back, her voice laced with certainty. "I know how to position us for the future. You're stuck in the past, Frank, still coding like it's your first job out of college." "Victor gets ambition," Betty said, her tone condescending. I took a slow sip of my drink, processing her words. "And how long have you and Victor been planning this little coup?" 6 months, she answered, her eyes narrowing. "What have you been doing?" I couldn't help but smile a little. "Your mistake was using the company email system." Her face flushed, and her voice rose. "You hacked my emails? That's illegal." "Not if you're conducting company business on private servers to cover up an affair and financial fraud," I said, setting my glass down. "The private jets to Cabo, the suite at the Bellagio, the shopping sprees at Tiffany's, all on the company dime. The board's not going to like that." Betty's confidence faltered, but she quickly recovered. "You don't have proof." "I have everything," I said, leaning forward. Every message, every receipt, every meeting where you and Victor planned how to push me aside. She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing even further. So what now? You're going to cry to the board? Tell them your wife outplayed you? I smiled, but it wasn't a smile that reached my eyes. I'm not going to do anything yet. Betty tilted her head, a flicker of worry crossing her face. What does that mean? I stood up slowly, the weight of the moment sinking in. It means congratulations on your promotion, Betty. I hope you're ready for your first day. Monday morning hit with the unforgiving brightness of a Nevada desert. I dressed carefully, the charcoal suit fitting just right, the crisp white shirt sharp against my skin. My tie, subtle blue, was the final touch. I arrived at Valor Gaming headquarters half an hour before Betty, giving me a bit of time to set a few things in motion. As I walked into the main conference room, the development team was already gathered. 20 sets of eyes turned to me. Some looked sympathetic, others curious, most were a mix of both. They all knew what was coming. I greeted them calmly, letting my shoulders relax. I believe we have a team meeting today to introduce our new department head. Ava Shun, one of the senior developers, stood up and walked over to me. Her frustration was evident. Frank, this is bullshit. You should be running this department. We all know it. I let a small smile curve my lips. That's actually why I called this pre-meeting. I turned to face the team, letting the tension settle around us. I want to be clear, I continued, my voice steady. Betty Vance is now your boss. I let that hang in the air for a moment. And I expect all of you to treat her with the respect her position deserves. A few confused glances were exchanged, but I didn't pause. Respect must be earned, I said, my tone firm. Betty has no background in game development. No coding experience. No management experience. She's going to need your help to understand even the basics of what we do here. I let the words sink in, watching their faces. So, when she asks questions, and trust me, she will ask a lot of them, I want you to explain everything. Every line of code, every algorithm, every game mechanic. She's here to learn. A slow smile spread across Ava's face as the meaning hit her. Complete transparency. Got it. Absolute transparency, I said, keeping my tone even. Agreed. Now, I believe our new head of development will be arriving shortly. Let's make her first day unforgettable. 15 minutes later, Betty swept into the conference room like she owned the place. Dressed in a designer suit that screamed expensive taste, she moved with an air of confidence that almost seemed rehearsed. The entire development team sat there waiting. I hung back at the back of the room, observing. She smiled brightly as she stepped up to the head of the table. Good morning, everyone, Betty greeted us, her voice upbeat. I'm excited to begin this new chapter with all of you. I know I have big shoes to fill, but I'm confident that together, we can take Valor Gaming to the next level. She glanced over at me, and I could see the faintest challenge in her eyes. Frank has graciously agreed to stay on as a senior developer, she continued, her tone almost too polished, and I'll be relying on his expertise as I transition into this role. I decided to speak up. Actually, I began, I think the team has some questions they'd like to ask you. Betty's smile didn't waver. Of course, she said, I'm an open book for the next hour. The questions started coming fast, one after another. Each one more technical than the last, about game engines, programming languages, server architecture, and the intricacies of competitive gameplay mechanics. As each question came, Betty's confident facade started to crack. Ava was the first to really dig in, her tone calm yet probing. Could you explain your approach to balancing competitive gameplay when implementing a new character class? Betty hesitated. Her smile faltered for a split second, and she cleared her throat. Well, I believe in taking a holistic approach, looking at the data, specifically. She trailed off, clearly trying to find her footing. Which data metrics? Another developer pressed, leaning in slightly. I watched as the cracks widened. Do you prefer using win rate distributions or time-to-kill ratios for initial balancing? Someone asked, breaking the silence. Betty's voice was steady, but I could hear the uncertainty creeping in. Both are valuable, she responded, but her words lacked the confidence she'd started with. Another developer jumped in, pushing her further, and what are your thoughts on the current debate between deterministic versus stochastic netcode implementation for our new fighter title? By the end of the meeting, it was clear she was out of her depth. The flush of humiliation was starting to show, no matter how much makeup she tried to hide it with. As the team started filing out, she grabbed my arm. What the hell was that? She hissed, her voice sharp. I raised an eyebrow, keeping my composure. That was your team getting to know their new boss. Isn't that what you wanted? You put them up to this, she snapped. I gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. I simply encouraged transparency, Betty. I checked my watch, pretending to be distracted. By the way, you have a meeting with the server team in 5 minutes. I'd brush up on distributed systems architecture if I were you. As I walked out, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Jesse, Phase 1, complete. Moving to Phase 2, *. Just as Betty's meeting with the server team began, disaster struck. Alerts blared across the tech department as Valor Gaming's main servers crashed, every one of them, simultaneously. The flagship game that millions played worldwide was offline without warning. Within minutes, social media erupted in complaints. Customer service lines lit up, and the revenue began to hemorrhage with every passing second. I watched from my office as Betty was pulled from her meeting and rushed into an emergency response session. Victor's voice cracked through the speakerphone, sharp and demanding. "What the hell is going on? We're losing millions." The head of IT's response was strained. "We're looking into it, but it seems like some kind of cascading failure across our authentication servers." Victor didn't let up. "Betty," he barked, "fix this now. This is why I put you in charge." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Betty. She stood there, motionless, completely out of her depth. She stammered, I think we should restore from backup." The stillness that followed was almost suffocating. I couldn't watch her flounder any longer. "I'll handle this," I said, stepping forward. "Betty can observe the recovery process. It'll be a learning experience." For the next 3 hours, I led the team through the crisis, keeping my cool as we systematically tracked down the failure points and pieced everything back together. The servers slowly started coming back online, and eventually, the crisis was contained. But not without a cost. Valor had lost an estimated $2 million in revenue, and worse, the damage to our player base's trust was immeasurable. Betty retreated to her office, no doubt to lick her wounds. But her day wasn't anywhere near over. As she tried to draft a public response to the disaster, her assistant rushed in, tablet in hand. "Ms. Vance, you need to see this. It's trending everywhere." The screen lit up with a tweet from 3 years ago, before Betty had even considered working at Valor Gaming. The words made my stomach twist, "Why do girl gamers always need special treatment? Either get good or get out. No one wants to hear your whining. #NoSimZone." It was everywhere. Somehow, the tweet had resurfaced and gone viral. Within minutes, thousands of people were sharing their outrage, furious that Valor Gaming had put someone with those kinds of views in charge of their development team. The #ValorHatesWomen started trending, and I could see the blood drain from Betty's face as she stared at her screen. "I deleted this years ago," she muttered under her breath. Her assistant was quick to fill in the blanks. It was screenshotted. "Gaming journalists are asking for comments. A few female streamers have already said they're boycotting Valor titles." Betty's fingers trembled as she grabbed her phone, dialing Victor's number, but it went straight to voicemail. She tried again, and again, but there was no answer. What she didn't know was that Victor was in the middle of his own crisis. An anonymous whistleblower had leaked documents to the financial press, alleging that the CEO had been embezzling funds from the company for personal gain. The documents didn't mention Betty at all, but they were crafted to paint a damning picture of Victor's financial misconduct. By the end of the day, 3 major sponsors had pulled out of Valor Gaming's upcoming tournament, citing concerns over the company's leadership and ethics. The stock price had plummeted by 15%, and Betty, less than 12 hours into her new role, found herself at the heart of a perfect storm. When she finally left the office that night, I was waiting by the elevator. "Tough first day?" I asked, my voice casual, though my eyes were cold. Betty stopped in her tracks, her gaze meeting mine. I could see the realization settle in. She understood now. I knew what was coming. I could feel it in my bones as Frank stepped into the elevator, holding the door open, clearly too drained to argue. Betty followed him in, and the doors closed with a soft hiss. He didn't waste time. His voice was low, almost quiet, as if he were saying something that didn't need to be said out loud. "You know what the difference is between us, Betty?" he asked, looking straight ahead. "I built things, games, teams, systems. I created value." He paused, letting it sink in. "You and Victor, you just take things. And people who only take eventually run out of things to steal." Betty's voice was tight as she shot back, "Is that a threat?" Frank didn't even flinch. He smiled faintly, his eyes still fixed forward. As the elevator started its descent, he answered, "No, Betty. It's a forecast." The silence between us stretched as we reached the lobby. People were rushing past us, all dressed in dark suits, heading toward the conference rooms with grim expressions. Betty stopped one of them, her voice urgent. "What's going on?" The assistant barely looked at her. "Emergency board meeting. Something about financial irregularities." Frank checked his watch, his face unreadable. "Right on schedule," he muttered. Then, glancing over at Betty, he added, "I'd hurry if I were you. I think your boyfriend might need your support." The emergency board meeting was set for 9 p.m. in the executive conference room at Valor Gaming's headquarters. When we got there, I was the first to arrive. I moved with practiced precision, placing documents in front of each seat at the massive conference table. It was the kind of room that screamed corporate power: floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Las Vegas Strip, sleek Blackstone furniture, polished leather chairs, everything designed to impress. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, and then Daphne Moore walked in. Her face was a mask of neutrality, but I could see the flicker of calculation in her eyes as she took in the scene, surveying my work with a practiced glance. It had been quite a day, and Daphne's voice cut through the tension in the air as she took her seat at the head of the table. She gestured around with a sarcastic flick. "Server crashes, social media scandals, stock price in free fall. Mercury must be in retrograde, right?" Frank didn't miss a beat, replying dryly, "Seems about right." Daphne's lips twitched, clearly entertained by his response. And now these financial documents just mysteriously showing up in the press. Strange coincidence, very strange. She studied him closely, her sharp eyes catching everything. "Victor's done, isn't he, Frank?" I watched as Frank straightened a folder in front of him, his movements precise, controlled. "I'll make sure of it," he replied, his voice calm. Daphne raised an eyebrow. "And after that? Have you thought that far ahead?" Before Frank could answer, the rest of the board members began filing in, their faces all grim. The hum of tense whispers filled the room as they took their seats. Betty slipped in last, looking flustered and out of place. She chose a chair at the back, pointedly avoiding Frank's gaze, as if she could hide from whatever storm was brewing. And then, Victor Langford barged through the doors, his face flushed with anger, eyes scanning the room before landing squarely on Frank. "This is your doing," he snarled, his voice dripping with accusation. Frank raised an eyebrow, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. "I'm not sure what you mean," he said, feigning confusion. Victor slammed his fist on the table, making several board members jump in their seats. "Who leaked those financial reports?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the room. Frank leaned back, as relaxed as ever, his gaze never leaving Victor. The room fell deathly silent, the tension hanging thick in the air. Gerald Hughes, the chairman, cleared his throat sharply, trying to regain control of the situation. "Let's bring this meeting to order," he said, his voice heavy with authority. The meeting started with a sense of heaviness, the kind that makes your chest tighten as you sit there, trying to keep your cool. Victor was already seething, his voice laced with sarcasm. "We're here to address some very serious allegations that have come to light today." He scoffed, looking around the room as if he was above all this. "Allegations? Some disgruntled employee hacked our systems and doctored reports. This is corporate espionage, not a real scandal." I had no intention of letting him control the narrative, so I stood up and walked to the front of the room with a calm respect that barely hid the tension I was feeling. "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to present some information relevant to this discussion." "Go ahead, Mr. Vance," Hughes said, his voice quiet but expectant. I activated the projector, and the large screen flickered to life, displaying financial records. They were all neatly organized, with certain items highlighted for emphasis. "What you're seeing are Valor Gaming's actual financial records for the past 18 months, I began, my voice steady and controlled. "I've taken the liberty of highlighting certain expenditures that warrant closer examination." I clicked through the slides. Here we have $342,000 listed under market research. But when you dig a little deeper, you'll find it funded private jet trips to Cabo San Lucas, Bali, and the Maldives. I clicked to the next slide. And here's $175,000 charged for consultant fees. That money was spent buying jewelry from Tiffany's and Cartier. Victor's face immediately darkened. He stood, his anger palpable. "You hacked confidential company records," he snapped, glaring at me. I didn't flinch. As head of game development, until this morning, I had full access to all company systems, I replied smoothly. No hacking was required. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the moment sinking in. I clicked again, bringing up another slide showing hotel reservations, luxury hotel suites booked under the company account. The room grew quieter. I knew the tide was turning. I paused for a moment, letting the weight of my next words settle over the room. "You'll note that these expenses align with Betty Vance's travels, before she was even officially employed by Valor." Betty stiffened in her chair, her eyes narrowing at the screen, but I wasn't finished. Hughes leaned forward, his voice dripping with disbelief. "Are you suggesting, Mr. Langford, that Victor was using company funds for a personal relationship?" I didn't flinch. "I'm not suggesting anything," I said calmly, glancing back at the screen. The evidence speaks for itself. Victor's reaction was immediate. He shot to his feet, his voice rising. This is a witch hunt. Yes, I use company resources. It's my right as CEO. I built this company. These perks are standard in the industry. But Daphne's voice cut through his protest, cool and unyielding. Embezzlement is not a standard perk. Victor snapped his mouth shut as if the words had been ripped from him, but then, without warning, he dug in his heels. That's not true. I earned my position. His words were sharp, defensive. Frank didn't give him a chance to recover. He clicked to the next slide, revealing an email from Victor to HR. It was dated 2 months earlier. Rewrite the head of development requirements, it read. Take out the technical qualifications and add a communications background. Instead, I want Betty Vance in that role by summer. Understood. The silence in the room was deafening. I glanced at Betty, whose face had gone pale, and she gasped, visibly shaken. You manipulated the hiring process, Frank said, his voice quiet but sure. You stole from the company. Victor's face turned crimson, his fists clenching at his sides. Frank's next words hit like a hammer, and now you're planning to sell Valor Gaming without board approval. The air in the room shifted, and Hughes half rose from his chair, his face a mix of shock and disbelief. A sale, he murmured, voice cracking with suspicion. Frank handed out fresh documents to everyone, and I saw the board members take them in with wide eyes. The room was frozen in a moment of stunned realization. Victor has been in secret negotiations with Golden Dragon Entertainment to sell his controlling shares at a premium, Frank stated plainly. And just like that, the truth spilled into the room like a flood. I could feel the room shift as the weight of what Frank had just dropped sank in. The rest of the shareholders were skimming through the evidence, their voices rising in anger. Questions flew, and chaos erupted. But in the middle of it all, there stood Victor, looking like a cornered animal. His face twisted in fury, his hands clenched at his sides. You have one option, Daphne's voice cut through the noise, sharp as a knife. Resign, or I'll bury you. Victor's eyes flared with outrage. This is my company, he yelled, his voice thick with defiance. You can't force me out. Before anyone could react, Hughes spoke up, calm but firm. With this evidence, we can and we will. The board will call for a vote of no confidence. After that, expect criminal charges. Victor's gaze swept the room, but there was no one there willing to back him up. Even Betty, who had been one of his closest allies, was pulling away, visibly distancing herself from him. Frank slid a document across the table, Victor's resignation letter, already signed at the bottom. Do the honors, Frank said, his voice cool, offering Victor a pen. For a moment, Victor just glared at him, hatred in his eyes. I thought for sure he would explode, maybe lunge at Frank in a fit of rage. But instead, his hand shot out, grabbing the pen with a snarl. He scribbled his name at the bottom of the page and slammed it back down onto the table. You'll regret this, he spat, his voice low and venomous. All of you will. Frank didn't flinch. Your company credentials have already been deactivated, he said quietly. Security is waiting to escort you out. Just as Frank finished speaking, 2 security officers appeared at the door. The finality of it hit me like a wave. The man who had once been at the helm was now nothing more than a disgraced figure being escorted out of the building. Victor tried to straighten his jacket, as if he could somehow salvage his dignity in front of all of us. I don't need an escort, he muttered, his voice barely concealing the frustration he was feeling. But Frank just shot him a look, the smallest of smiles tugging at his lips. Company policy, he said, his voice smooth. For former employees. Victor didn't argue as the security team guided him out of the room. The board members, who had been stunned into silence just moments ago, were now deep in discussion, their voices rising in a chorus of questions and heated exchanges. I noticed Betty trying to slip out quietly, hoping to avoid the chaos, but Daphne was right there, blocking her path. Ms. Vance, she said, her tone sharp, we're not finished here. Betty stood there, frozen, in the center of the conference room. The board members circled her, their eyes narrowing as they turned their attention to her, scrutinizing her involvement in everything that had just happened. The shock of Victor's sudden fall from power had worn off, and now they were focused on her. I need to explain, Betty said, her voice shaky as she attempted to maintain some semblance of control. I had no idea about Victor's financial misdeeds. Our relationship was purely professional. Frank, who had already taken his seat again, raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Hughes, however, wasn't as quiet. He started flipping through the evidence Frank had presented earlier. The emails tell a different story, he said, his voice steady, but the accusation was clear. And your rapid promotion from PR to head of game development raises some serious questions. Betty's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place, but she tried to push through. I have qualifications, she insisted, her voice growing more defensive. I was bringing a fresh perspective to the department, innovation, new ideas. Daphne wasn't buying it. Innovation, she asked, her voice cold. What kind of new ideas? Betty faltered for just a moment, clearly thrown off by the question. I was still developing my strategic vision, she said, the words coming out more slowly than usual. After today's server crash, which, as you know, cost us millions. Hughes didn't let her off the hook. And the social media controversy surrounding your past comments, he added, his tone not allowing her any room to escape. The room was silent now, all eyes on Betty, and the weight of the moment felt like it was suffocating her. The board was already voicing their concerns about Betty's ability to lead the development team. She was quick to defend herself, though. That tweet was taken out of context, she said. And the server crash wasn't my fault. It was sabotage. She paused for a moment, then shot a quick glance toward Frank. He didn't react, but I saw him take note of her sudden shift in blame. She was already looking for someone to point a finger at. Daphne didn't hesitate. Ms. Vance, the truth remains that you were promoted under fraudulent circumstances, thanks to a CEO who was misusing company resources for an inappropriate relationship with you. That's not true. Betty shot back, but Daphne interrupted her, her voice firm but controlled. You're fired. The blood drained from Betty's face. For a second, it seemed like she couldn't process it. No, wait. I can fix this, she pleaded. Oh, I'm sure you'll try, Daphne replied with a cold smile, her tone indifferent. Security will escort you to clean out your office. Your credentials have already been disabled. Betty's eyes darted around the room, desperate for any support, but there was no one. Everyone was silent, staring at her, no one offering a hand. Her gaze finally locked onto Frank. This is your doing, she hissed, her voice laced with venom. You orchestrated all of this. Frank met her gaze without flinching. You made your choices, Betty, he said calmly. Now you have to live with them. As security moved in to lead her out, I stayed in my seat, watching her. The board, though, wasn't distracted for long. They quickly turned their attention back to the next steps, and Hughes called the meeting to order once again. After everything that had gone down, Hughes stood up and made his announcement. We need interim leadership while we sort through this mess. He turned to Daphne. You'll temporarily assume the CEO responsibilities. Daphne nodded without hesitation. I accept. Then, he shifted the focus to the development team. For head of game development, I nominate Frank Vance to return to his position. Another board member quickly seconded the motion, and Hughes asked, all in favor? The room was filled with approving looks and nods. Motion carries. Frank, welcome back. Frank gave a slight nod, acknowledging the vote. Thank you. I'll need full authority to stabilize the development division after today's disruptions. Granted, Hughes confirmed. Do whatever is necessary to get us back on track. Once the meeting wrapped up, Frank stepped out into the hallway, only to find Daphne waiting by the elevator. Quite the chess player, aren't you, she said, her voice carrying a hint of admiration. Taking down Victor and Betty in one day. Frank pressed the elevator button and gave her a puzzled look. I don't know what you mean. Daphne scoffed. Come on, Frank. The server crash that just so happened during Betty's first meeting. That old tweet resurfacing out of nowhere. And let's not forget the perfectly timed leak of financial documents. She studied him for a moment, her gaze sharp. You could have exposed them both weeks ago. Instead, you waited and set up their very public downfall. The elevator dinged and the doors slid open. They both stepped inside. What happens next? She asked as the doors closed behind them. Are you satisfied with just getting your old job back? Frank smiled, just barely, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. It wasn't about the job for her, was it? I asked Daphne, watching her expression carefully. She met my gaze and shook her head. No, she admitted. It was about retribution. I paused, letting the weight of that truth hang in the air for a moment. Justice, I corrected her, but it's not finished yet. Later that night, I came back to the penthouse, the place I'd shared with Betty. The moment I walked in, I knew something was wrong. The apartment was a mess, drawers were pulled open, clothes were scattered across the bed, and the jewelry box was empty. She had come through here in a rush, grabbing whatever she could before disappearing. I moved through the apartment methodically, gathering the things she had left behind. As I packed, my phone rang. It was my lawyer. It's done, he said. The divorce papers were served to Mrs. Vance earlier this evening, right after she left Valor's headquarters. I could feel my pulse slow as he continued. Given the circumstances, we've requested expedited proceedings, along with a freeze on joint assets until everything's resolved. The prenuptial agreement is solid. The infidelity clause is clear, she gets nothing. I felt a cold satisfaction wash over me as I replied, "Keep me updated." After the call ended, I continued gathering Betty's things. Each item of hers I packed away made me feel just a little more detached from her. Her presence in my life was already fading into the past. A month later, I had settled into my restored role as head of game development. The department was slowly rebuilding, morale was higher, productivity was back on track. The server infrastructure had been overhauled properly this time, and Valor's stock had started to show signs of recovery. I sat at my desk, reviewing the quarterly projections, when I heard a knock at my door. "Got a minute?" Jesse asked as he walked in and shut the door behind him. "Always for you," I replied, setting my tablet down. "What's up?" He sank into the chair across from my desk, pulling out his phone and scrolling through his notes. "I've been keeping an eye on our friends, like you asked." I leaned back, waiting for him to continue. "Victor's been blacklisted from every major gaming company. 2 hedge funds he approached for backing his new venture, both backed out after anonymous tips about his past." A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. That was exactly what I'd been hoping for. "And Betty?" I asked, already knowing this was where things would get interesting. Jesse's expression shifted. "That's actually why I'm here. She's been trying to contact you, multiple calls to your personal number, emails to your private account." "I've blocked her on everything," I said flatly, leaning back in my chair. "She's getting desperate," Jesse continued, leaning forward. "She lost the condo when the bank accounts got frozen. Her fancy sports car was repossessed last week. She's been staying at some rundown motel off the strip." I raised an eyebrow, curious if she had managed to find some work. Jesse gave a grim smile. "That's the best part. She had 3 interviews at gaming companies, but all of them got cancelled at the last minute for mysterious reasons. She finally landed a job, customer service at Game Realm." My satisfaction couldn't be contained. "That Valor knockoff company with the terrible mobile games and even worse customer service?" I said with a hint of amusement. Jesse nodded. "Yeah, and now she's handling angry player complaints on a minimum wage graveyard shift. It's perfect." Jesse filled me in, telling me she used to fly around in private jets, living off the company's dime. Now, she's stuck eating ramen and taking calls from frustrated 12-year-olds complaining about in-game purchases. I leaned back in my chair, a cold smile tugging at my lips. "Perfect." He didn't stop there. "The board meeting is set for tomorrow. Daphne's already recommended you for the CEO position. It's pretty much a done deal." I let the news sink in, nodding slowly. "Any opposition?" "None," Jesse replied. "You're the one who saved the company from Victor's mess. Your games are breaking records, the team is behind you, and the stock price has bounced back. The board can't wait to hand you the job." "Good." I stood up and moved toward the window, looking out over the Las Vegas skyline. "Have security been briefed about Betty? I don't want her anywhere near the building tomorrow." "They're already on it," Jesse assured me. "What if she keeps trying to contact you?" I shrugged, feeling indifferent. "She'll give up. Eventually. When she realizes there's nothing left for her here." Later that night, as I worked in my office, my private line rang. It was an unlisted number, one only a handful of people had. I debated ignoring it, but something made me answer. "Frank Vance," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Frank." It was Betty's voice. Once confident and seductive, now it was small, broken. "Please don't hang up." I didn't say anything. Just waited. "I know you're there," she continued. I need to talk to you. Just 5 minutes." I finally spoke, my voice cold. What could you possibly have to say that I would want to hear? I finally spoke, my voice cold, almost robotic. "I made a mistake," Betty's voice came through, shaky with desperation. "A terrible mistake. I was greedy and stupid." "And you got caught," I said, finishing her sentence for her. I could almost hear her flinch. "No," she continued, her voice cracking. "It's more than that. I've lost everything, Frank. My job, my home, my reputation. I'm working customer service for $12 an hour. Do you know what that's like? Having angry gamers yelling at you all night long?" I didn't respond right away. Honestly, I didn't know what to say. So I just said, "No. But you're learning something," I added coolly. "Valuable skills, like empathy and humility. Things you've always lacked." She wasn't done, though. Her voice broke again. "Frank, please, I need help. Just until I can get back on my feet, or at least a reference for a better job." I closed my eyes, remembering everything. The betrayal. The humiliation. How coldly she'd planned to discard me after using me to climb her way up. The way she'd used my reputation to get ahead in her career. "You did this to yourself, Betty," I finally said. "You made your choice when you decided to sleep with Victor. When you plotted against me. When you took that promotion, knowing you weren't even qualified. Her voice trembled, but I could barely feel any sympathy anymore. Frank, please. You're paying for it now, I said, my voice hardening. And you'll keep paying for it. That's how consequences work. She sighed through the line, almost inaudible. What do you want from me? I heard her say finally. I didn't hesitate. An apology. Fine. I'm sorry I made a horrible mistake. I hung up, not needing to say another word. What else do you want? She'd asked. But I didn't want anything from her. That's the point. I didn't need anything from Betty anymore. Not after everything. I just sat there for a moment, staring out at the lights of Las Vegas. The city, bustling and bright, felt so distant. After a few minutes, I turned back to my work, pushing the whole conversation, and Betty, out of my mind for good. The next day, the board meeting went exactly as Jesse had predicted. Without a single dissenting vote, I was appointed CEO of Valor Gaming Enterprises. As the congratulations came in from the board members and executives, I noticed Daphne standing off to the side, watching me with a knowing look on her face. Congratulations, CEO Vance, she said when the room had emptied. Her voice was cool, like she was impressed, but not in the least bit surprised. Thank you, Daphne, I replied, not missing a beat. I hope you'll stay on as COO. The company needs your expertise. She didn't answer right away, but when she did, there was a slight smile on her lips. Of course. But I have to ask. Do you plan this all along? Victor's downfall, clearing the path for your ascension? I met her gaze without flinching. I'm just a game developer who saw an opportunity. Daphne raised an eyebrow. A chess master who saw 20 moves ahead. I leaned back in my chair, letting that sink in. Not destruction, I corrected her, my voice low. Justice. Victor stole from the company. Betty betrayed her vows. They earned their fates. Daphne gave me a long, searching look before speaking. And now that you've won, have you found what you were looking for? I thought about her question for a moment, then answered, I protected what I built. That's enough. I left the boardroom to step into my new role as CEO, my phone buzzing in my pocket. It was a message from Jesse, * Betty just got fired from Game Realm. Apparently, she snapped at a customer. She's got nothing left, *. I read it, but didn't bother replying. There was no need. I deleted the message, adjusted my tie, and forced a confident smile onto my face before walking through the doors to address the company. The game was over. I had won. 6 months later, I sat in my penthouse office at the top of Valor Gaming's headquarters. From here, the floor-to-ceiling windows provided an incredible view of the Las Vegas skyline, electric lights flickering like stars in the night sky. Since becoming CEO, I'd taken the company in bold new directions. We acquired 2 smaller studios, launched an innovative VR platform, and doubled down on esports, pulling in record-breaking prize pools. The same industry that had once whispered about my failure now spoke of me with nothing but awe and respect. Frank Vance's name had become synonymous with strategic brilliance and game-changing innovation. Valor Gaming stock had recovered and was now soaring to historic highs. Just then, the intercom buzzed. Mr. Vance, Jesse Rios and Daphne Moore are here to see you. Send them in, I replied, straightening up in my chair. The door opened, and in walked my 2 most trusted allies. Jesse walked in carrying a bottle of 30-year-old scotch and 3 glasses. Daphne followed him, holding a folder filled with papers. As I stood to greet them, I asked, "What's the occasion?" Jesse set the glasses down on my desk and began pouring. "You could say the Golden Dragon deal is finally dead," he said with a sharp smile. Daphne added, settling into a chair. "Victor's last hope. They officially pulled their acquisition offer for his personal game studio. No one's going to touch him now." I accepted a glass from Jesse, nodding as he spoke. "And Betty?" I asked. Jesse's smile turned colder. "Betty's working retail at a mall kiosk, selling phone cases. I heard she had to move to a tiny studio apartment in Henderson because she couldn't keep up with rent in Vegas anymore. She tried applying to 3 more gaming companies last month," he said. "All rejected her immediately." Daphne leaned back, glancing at me with a knowing look. "Your name carries weight in this industry, Frank. No one wants to risk crossing you by hiring her." I swirled the amber liquid in my glass, staring at it for a moment before meeting their eyes. "They made their choices," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Daphne raised her glass, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "I have to admit, Frank, you played this brilliantly. 6 months ago, you were the betrayed husband whose wife took his job. Now you're the king of the gaming world, and they're barely scraping by." Jesse lifted his glass as well, his eyes glinting with a mix of respect and something darker. "To Frank Vance," he said, "the man who never forgives and never forgets." We all drank the expensive scotch, the burn a welcome sensation as it slid down. I set my glass aside and walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. This was never about forgiveness, I thought quietly to myself. It was about consequences. About making sure things played out the way they should. I heard Daphne's voice behind me. "Call it what you want," she said, her tone matter-of-fact, "the end result is the same. You won. They lost. Completely." My reflection in the glass didn't show any signs of celebration, no smug grin or gleaming satisfaction, just the calm, focused expression of someone who had meticulously orchestrated everything to get exactly what he wanted. Daphne shifted the topic as she opened the folder in front of her. "The quarterly report looks excellent," she said, her voice lighter. "Revenues up 23%. User acquisitions exceeding projections. The board's thrilled. And the new Battle Royale game is testing off the charts." Jesse chimed in, "The dev team says we're on track for a holiday release." I turned back toward them, my mind still sharp, still focused on the next move. "Good. Schedule a press event for next month," I said. "I want to announce our 5-year roadmap. Personally." The conversation shifted back to business strategies and upcoming projects. We spent the next hour hashing out the details, and as the meeting came to a close, Jesse and Daphne started to pack up their things to leave. Just as they reached the door, Daphne paused and looked back at me. "Frank," she began, hesitating. "There's something I've been wondering. You never really answered me 6 months ago. Whether this victory, whether it satisfied you." I took a moment, reflecting on her question. "I protected what was mine," I replied. "I made sure those who betrayed me paid a price. But then, a small part of me wondered if there was more to it." "But, are you happy?" she asked, her voice soft but carrying an edge of curiosity. Daphne's question lingered in the air, but I didn't answer right away. My eyes drifted back to the skyline of Las Vegas, the city that now stood as the empire I controlled. Happiness? It wasn't the goal, not anymore. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady. Justice was. After they left, I stayed by the window, staring down at the city below, letting the stillness fill the room. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. I hesitated before checking it. It was from Betty. "Please talk to me. I'm desperate. I've lost everything. Just 5 minutes." I stared at the screen, feeling nothing. No anger. No pity. No satisfaction. Just a cold certainty that justice had been served. I blocked the number without a second thought, then turned my attention back to my work. In the glass of the window, my reflection showed a man who had calculated every move, every step, and anticipated every possible counter. I had emerged victorious from a game most people never even realized was being played. I never forgave. I never forgot. And in the end, I won.